Team Canada, Team Canada, Team Canada, Team Canada. It's all you're hearing these days. You've heard it. Everyone is saying it, especially in response to these threats coming from south of the border. Now, we've got a 30-day delay here on tariffs, but it's still an important thing to talk about. This idea of us all coming together to be on the same side, to be on the same team in the interest of Canada. But I've got a big question here and a big concern, and maybe you share it with me. What does that team stand for? And what happens if I don't personally agree with what you think that team should stand for? What happens to people who agree with you maybe in part, but have some big problems with other parts of what you're saying Team Canada is and what Team Canada represents? Are those people now, if they disagree with you, anti-Canadian? Because that's what I'm hearing a lot of people say. And I think that you might be surprised to see that if that is your definition, that there's a lot more anti-Canadian people if you're throwing around this term so willy-nilly to say you are not on Team Canada. We're talking about that today. I haven't heard people talking about this at length, but I've got some concerns with it. And we're going to be talking about the man who's likely going to be our next prime minister here in Canada. Some concerning things that were said this morning. And the 180 full turnaround flip that we're seeing from some politicians where previously shunned ideas and fringe ideas that maybe you would be made fun of for, or at the very least called the minority. Now some of those ideas are very, very commonplace and are actually being repeated by people who would have done that shunning in the past. We got to talk about a lot today. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Russ Matthews Show. Great to see you. A lot to talk about, as I said. Yeah, this Team Canada thing. I think it's a catch-all, right? If you do anything that somebody doesn't like, you're not Team Canada. That's not in the interests of Team Canada. I think that if I ever get into an argument with somebody and I just don't have a really good excuse for why I'm right, I'm just going to say, well, you're not on Team Canada. Come on, let's go to the bar that I want to go to. Otherwise, you're not Team Canada. This is what I'm going to say to my buddies now because it's a pretty good catch-all slogan. I got to show you this clip first because let me tell you, this guy can talk and he can talk well, very charismatic, very likable person if you just hear him talk. I've got a few concerns with something that was said this morning. I'm going to play you this clip. He says a lot of the right things, but there's an indication in here that I'm just not comfortable with and I think could lead to some problems for Canada. Let me show you, and I think you'll catch on to what I'm talking about here.
That are causing it, but
This, for those of you listening on the new podcast feed, this is Mark Carney. This is a candidate for Liberal leader and will probably be the next prime minister when Trudeau steps down if he's the one that wins. Let's listen in.
Can act as Canadians. There's a fever gripping America. And while it rages, Canadians will remain resolute and true to our values. While America engages in a war on woke, Canadians will continue to value inclusiveness. While America shuns the vulnerable, we will continue to show solidarity with one another. While America attempts to turn back the clock, Canadians will build sustainability for future generations. Before America's fever passes, we must seize this moment for Canada. This
was Mark Carney this morning at a press conference. Now, a couple big clips have gone viral, they've been shared around quite a lot from that little press conference this morning. And I think they're not getting the right takeaway from it. The headline catching thing is Mark Carney says that America is fighting this war against woke, and some sort of right-wing influencers in Canada are saying, well, that's Carney doubling down on the woke ideology, and that's the core issue of our day. I always have not really bought the whole extreme woke concern or the concern about that. I think you got to stay out of people's lives. And also, it doesn't need to be as big of a talking point. It doesn't need to be as big of a distraction for everybody to talk about. It's a very divisive thing when it comes up and is put in your face every single minute of every single day. But in reality, I think you let everybody live the way they want to live. You don't need to maybe when you talk education and what should be included in the curriculum, stuff like that, you can get into debates. But I think for 99% of people, 99% of the time, this stuff isn't a day-to-day problem that people are facing, even though if they're online all the time, you might start to think it. So this was the big clip that I've seen circulating. But the takeaway, I think, is wrong. I have less problem with this woke statement that I do the fever statement. Because in this clip, he says the right types of things, like we need to work as Canada, we need to build, but saying America is currently sick. America currently has a fever that needs an immune system response to push that out. I think that really is diminishing. It diminishes any kind of dissent from his personal worldview as that fever, as something that needs to be taken out, gone away with. It will heal from it because some people in the world don't see things the way that I see it. Well, then they're sick, but ultimately all things come to pass. They will grow, they will learn, they will get back to where they should be, which just so happens to be exactly having the same mindset as I do. Now, I think that there's a reality in this world where there's people who don't have the same views as you. You might not see the same way as your neighbor, and I think that that's okay. But I think in this statement, he's failing to recognize that those people have just as much of a right to think what they think and to have their views as he does his. And that's what really drives people away from government. And I think it's even more divisive than he's saying he wants to be right now. He says, this is a time when Canada needs to unite. But this statement to me doesn't seem like a very unifying statement. He talks about Canada remaining true to our values while saying that Canada has, or that America has lost their values. Their values are gone now. We have to take this opportunity to seize the day, to recognize that we are the ones, we are the righteous ones, and one day they will see and they will come back to the right path that we are on. And this gets to an idea that I've been thinking about a lot, and it's this idea that a lot of people have that there is a very incredibly clear right and a very incredibly clear wrong. Right, not as in conservative or politically leaning, right as in correct, what's correct and what's incorrect in terms of your views. But I think thinking in that way shows that you really can't conceive of someone having a different worldview from you, and results in you having to explain that worldview away as, oh, that person is misinformed. They are a victim to disinformation, or they're just not as smart as me. So if they were just educated as much as me, if they had the degrees that I have, they would come to see the world in the same way that I do, and which it just so happens to be the right way. Or saying these people who don't agree with me, they've fallen victim to a fever, they need to heal from this. That's pretty divisive talk to me, and I think it's not something that's great for our country. All this talk about Team Canada, Team Canada, Team Canada, all while saying, I am the one who gets to decide not only what Team Canada is, but who is on Team Canada. If you share my views, then you are on Team Canada. If you don't, then you're not. And does that make you traitorous if I brand myself as being Team Canada? It's a big problem. And as much as I hate to rehash the past, and maybe I enjoy it a little bit, if we're being honest, this all relates to the trucker protests. And I think that because I haven't talked at length about this in a while. I only did briefly before I was doing these long form podcast style episodes. But it relates to the trucker protests because let's go back there. Take you back to when that was going on. In my eyes, it should have been broken up when it started, broken up by the police. Like I was saying earlier, I'm of the mindset that I'll do what I want, you do what you want, and as long as you're not hurting me or affecting me, well, then that's just fine. You can go on and live your life. And I think the same goes for protest, right? You should have the right to peacefully protest as long as you're not blocking the freedoms of other people, including the freedom of travel, the freedom to go about your business and do what you need to do in your day. So in my eyes, blocking traffic and trade, that's illegal and that should have been stopped. And the police, I believe, had the power to do so, a total failure on their part not to do so in the first place. But don't get me wrong here. That's not to say that what they were protesting wasn't valid. It's along the same lines of me not thinking that a government should be able to economically force you to take a vaccine or any other medical intervention. I agree with that. That you shouldn't have to be forced by a government to do something that you aren't comfortable with, and that government shouldn't be able to take economic action at you to force you to do so. And it's not in relation even to the trucker protest that this view comes up from me. I think you got to think whenever a government does something, you have to think, well, even if I'm okay with this now, what would happen if the worst case scenario government, and whatever your view of that is, what would happen if that government came into power and then did a similar thing to you? Maybe you liked what the Liberal government did at that point. Would you have liked if the Conservatives did an even equally extreme thing to you? Like hypothetically, outside of COVID, outside of this current government, if a government that you didn't like or a government that you didn't trust, or maybe you think that that government is beholden to a foreign state or something like that, you don't trust them at all for this hypothetical situation. Let's say that that government that has already lost your trust is now in power. You disagree with all of their policies, they've lost your trust, and now they're the ones that are telling you that you have to do some sort of medical procedure or you have to do something very specific that you don't want to do. Well, maybe you wouldn't trust that government and it wouldn't feel that great to have them tell you to do something that you didn't want to do, right? I don't think that this is a stretch for a lot of people. And the same goes for this, the trucker situation in its entirety. Because it's not about the what, it's about the, well, then what next, right? Because it's precedent setting. If you wouldn't like something, if your least favorite political party did it, well, then you shouldn't be okay with your most favorite political party doing it. And that's not even mentioning, and I promise we'll get back to how this relates to Carney's statements this morning. I promise, because it does. That's not even mentioning the Emergencies Act and the way that the government was able to freeze people's bank accounts of citizens. These are Canadian citizens without any kind of due process there, and implementing this War Measures Emergencies Act to do so. Now, obviously, that was a last resort, and maybe they wouldn't have done it if, maybe I'm being charitable here, maybe they wouldn't have done it if the police actually handled that issue as it came up, rather than letting it go on and go on and go on. But the same sort of thing. What if a different government did this to me? Flip it on its head. Okay, so let's say we have a government in power that is extremely non-environmental, doesn't care about the environment at all, only wants to get pipelines built. Maybe you personally agree with that. Maybe you don't. Let's look at it as if that is the government that's in power. And for this example, let's say that you are very, very opposed to that. You go there, you protest it by standing in front of the bulldozers, and you're chaining yourself to the trees, doing that whole sort of thing. Well, it would be okay if the police came and they arrested you for being on private property or for stopping people from traveling or stopping trade or whatever it may be. It'd be fine for the police to go there, remove you, whatever criminal charges there are there. But I don't think that federal government should be able to freeze your bank account, go in and stop you from doing that protesting economically, taking away some of your other rights and freedoms, right? Because if you don't have access to your finances, you're not able to travel. Are you really even able to speak? right? You speak with your dollars in terms of where you go, what you buy, what you do with your money. Money is power. I think it's the sort of precursor to a lot of the other freedoms and rights that we have in Canada. All this to say, it shouldn't be the federal government going into a situation like that. The whole situation, though, relates to what Mark Carney is saying this morning. The idea, and you might remember the quote here from Trudeau at the time saying, these people that are coming to Ottawa to protest, these are a fringe minority of people. They do not represent Canada. They're not Team Canada. They're not Team Canada. They don't represent Canada. They're a fringe minority. They are in all effects not Canadian, or not Canadian in the way we want them to be, right? They are holding, and this is the direct quote, they are holding unacceptable views. Unacceptable views to whom? Unacceptable views. This is a similar comment, I think, to the statement that America has a fever right now. Americans aren't smart enough to have views that we don't see eye to eye with, or maybe we just believe that they're sick. They're gonna get better. They'll get back on the right course. They hold unacceptable views. And a fringe minority is running that country right now. Do you see the similarity here? Do you see the similarity in this language? I think you're pushing, in the trucker situation, you're pushing people who already distrust the government farther and farther away, saying, hey, if you don't align with our views, then we are not serving you. You are not our people. You are a fringe minority with unacceptable views. This feels similar to me. I think that the way to handle these statements, or the way to handle this, whether it's the trucker or whether it's these America has a fever comments, I think you got to say, we as a government, we don't agree with your views. We do not agree with your views. That's fine for a government to say. You can have a different opinion from me. But you've got to also say, we recognize your right to believe that. You can believe what you want to believe. You can say, if these people want to peacefully protest, they can, as long as they don't break the law and stop other free citizens from going about their business. If they do, the police will come and handle it based on the laws of the land. But we're not going to get involved federally. I think this is how you have to handle it. Instead, in reality, in this situation, as you know, the police failed to shut down the illegal elements of the protest. It got out of hand, and the government used this draconian force, reaching into the bank accounts of people, this illegal power, to finally, in the end, shut it down. But in this clip, the Trudeau one, where he says unacceptable views, that's what's most egregious to me. This idea of the government being able to determine which views are acceptable and which views are unacceptable, or not the views of Canadians. Speaking for Canadians in this way, it pushes people even farther away from the government. And I think that's kind of what could be happening here with this Team Canada idea, because that's a very helpful slogan, right? We heard all ahead of the tariff deadline that then got pushed out 30 days now. We heard every single politician say, we need to be Team Canada. We need to be united in the way that we go forward. Now, everybody was saying that, every single politician. But there were also politicians saying, oh, Danielle Smith in Alberta, she's not Team Canada. She's pursuing her own interests. She's not Team Canada. But then you have to get the question, who's the one that has the authority to determine who is Team Canada and who is not? Because if we have different views, we may both personally be thinking that we're acting in the interests of Canada. Just like the truckers probably thought that, hey, we are protesting a right to not have the government tell us what we do with our bodies. A right that maybe a lot of other people agree with when it comes to other issues, abortion, all kinds of things, right? I think that those are hand in hand, like being able to make the choice about your body with vaccines, and same too with abortion. I think that those are both rights that people should have. It's crazy that it's the kind of same argument, but on two sides of the political spectrum. And I probably just now made every single person angry who's watching this. But I think that both those people, both those sides of it should be able to make the decisions about what they do with their bodies. But it's this idea of, we are going to tell you what's acceptable. We're going to tell you what is right and what is truly Team Canada. So there have been all these ties for a strong, united Canada. But that same call requires some people who may disagree to abandon their views if they don't want to be called anti-Canadian. Do you see what I'm getting at here? The fact that you're saying there's a Team Canada, the fact that you're saying that, and that you're also saying these other people aren't part of Team Canada. The Liberals right now are saying Poilievre, he's not acting in the interest of Canada. He's not Team Canada. Just as Poilievre would say, oh, the Liberals aren't Team Canada. The word quickly loses its meaning. But it is a sentiment that's been growing in Canada, this feeling like, hey, all of us Canadians, we weren't happy with the Trump tariffs. These Trump tariffs could really hurt Canada. And that's true. But I think that there's a lot of people who also resonate, at least, with the approach of having a country that is more self-reliant. And this gets into the idea of Canadian nationalism. What does that mean? That sounds like something that maybe you would get criticized for talking about in the past. What is Canadian nationalism? I thought we were a post-nationalist state, right? We don't really have an identity. I think that has changed with this common enemy of Trump in a lot of people's eyes, saying we've got this threat of tariffs. Wait a minute, we need to be less reliant on one country for everything. We need to act in the best interest of Canadians. It's led to a wave of every single politician, every single party, talking about how wonderful it is that Canadians have been able to unite as one Team Canada against Trump. We now have a common enemy. We don't need to be fighting each other as hard because we can unite here. It made us realize how important it is to work towards our common interests. This, again, Team Canada approach. And I think having that common enemy has helped the Trudeau government quite a bit lately. They've seen some improvements in their polling numbers. It doesn't look like it's going to be as much of a blowout as it's been looking for the Conservatives. Some conservative commentators are saying that all those polls are lies now. The same polls that said that Poilievre was way ahead before, that they were happy with, now aren't happy with, now that the polling numbers have changed. Hey, trust polls, don't trust polls. I don't care. But don't only trust them when they say what you want them to say. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe just do away with them altogether and just talk to the people around you and get a vibe check of what people are actually thinking from doing that, rather than being perma online and getting mad at whatever pollster you want to that day because they're saying that something that you don't like. But this has helped the Trudeau government. And it's a widely studied phenomenon where wartime presidents, wartime prime ministers get pretty good approval ratings, right? And I'm not saying we're in a war-like situation right now, but we certainly do have an existential threat that has popped up, one that wasn't there before. One that I think a lot of Canadians have united around, and as a result, we look to our leaders and maybe put more weight behind them because of that sort of feeling like, hey, we've got to be on Team Canada here. Resulted in approval ratings and polls for the Liberals looking better. But what's odd to me is that this Canadian nationalism that everybody's talking about, we've now realized we've got to be Team Canada. This very same Canadian nationalism that's being so widely praised, I don't think that it would have been praised just a few weeks ago. All the same ideas, 1 month later, today, are applauded. Whereas I think a month ago, you probably wouldn't have gotten the big round of applause that you would have from all the parties if you started talking about Canadian nationalism. or perhaps the term is defined differently by different people, and I'm not certain about it. To me, I think it's a lot about acting in the best interest of Canadian citizens, even if it doesn't align with international standards set by other people outside of Canada. I think that Canadian nationalism is saying, hey, what's best for Canada? Not just Canada as an abstract whole, but what's best for Canadian people, specifically Canadian people who aren't politicians, Canadian people who aren't the top CEOs, people who aren't earning $800,000 a year plus bonuses. If I have to make a decision that goes against some of my international allies to make a decision that serves those people, I think you should be willing to do that if you're talking about nationalism in Canada. Making decisions that see Canadian people get ahead and primarily focusing on the issues that most affect Canadians. That's what I think it is. Maybe it's defined differently. But those kinds of messages, I don't think many people would, just maybe people watching this have a different viewpoint, but I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that being a good thing, to act with those interests in mind. I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments. And hey, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. More episodes like this to come. And you can find now in the link in the description of this video now, these podcasts are going to be live on Spotify and soon to come to your other podcast platforms. But maybe people do agree with me there. But it seems very ironic to me, perhaps, that maybe just a month ago, that same kind of messaging that now seems to be coming out of the mouths of every single politician, Canada first, act in Canada's interest at all times, we got to be less dependent on other nations, we got to be able to do things for ourselves, this Canadian nationalism, I think if you said that a couple months ago, a lot of people would say that is dangerous, populist nationalist rhetoric, and it's the kind of stuff that led to Trump being elected. So you shouldn't be saying that about Canada because it's the same sort of path that Americans went on, and now they've got Trump, for better or worse, depending on how you look at that situation. I think it would lead to a lot of people saying, that's populism. That's dangerous. But the people who would have said that just a month ago now are sort of grabbing on to the same narratives because they're seeing it resonates with Canadians. And it makes the criticism of these kinds of narratives seem a little bit false to begin with. Because we're seeing that be accepted by the current Liberal government and every single Liberal leadership candidate at the moment. And we see it in the policy too. All the candidates in the Liberal leadership race are now bailing on the carbon tax, which was a keystone part of their policy over the past 5 years, certainly, and longer than that. They're bailing on the capital gains tax that was introduced in this most recent April of 2024, the capital gains tax that honestly I believe wasn't going to affect a ton of people. It was only capital gains over $1 million in a single calendar year. But it's the idea of putting a tax in that's not going to be popular with people, even if it's not going to impact a lot of people. It may have impacted some boomers with a couple houses that needed to sell a cottage or something like that, because there's no exemption on the capital gains tax for primary residences. It may have affected those people. But now every Liberal leadership candidate is saying, actually, we're not going to do that. Actually, we're not going to do the carbon tax. It seems like an about face that's pretty hard to reconcile. And all this is to say that it is making me very cynical. If you haven't seen, maybe you're watching this slow descent into cynicism and madness. Maybe one day I'll get out of it and I'll be a comedy podcaster or something like that. I don't know if that's exactly my bag, though. But it's making me more cynical, honestly, and that seems to be the road that I'm going down, and maybe you're going down it with me, and at least we're going down it together. But it makes me cynical because It seems that these opinions are changed not on the basis of, oh, now I have new information about the issue, so I'm going to change my mind about it, because that's fine. I have no problem with flip-flopping when it's that. When it's, oh, I didn't know that, now I learned more, we've got more data, so I'm going to change my mind. I think we should applaud politicians when they change their mind about things as a result of new data. But with the carbon tax and with the capital gains tax, nothing has changed here. Nothing has changed except for the political situation and the political opportunity. You see how emphatically Poilievre has been pushing the axe the tax thing. And it seems like even the people who agree with the effectiveness of the carbon tax are saying, well, because political tides have turned and we're seeing this isn't a popular policy, we're not going to do it anymore. It's not about something changing. It's not about new data coming in. It's about, oh, we can diminish the power of Poilievre's slogan if we all say we're also not on board for this thing, right? It's political calculations, and maybe that's how it's supposed to work, that politicians don't have real worldviews and they just follow the tide of public opinion. Maybe that does result in people being more effectively represented. But I'm just not convinced that if people were elected into positions of power after just simply shifting to get that political power, that they would have any kind of moral qualms with going against it, because it doesn't seem to be an internally come to conclusion, but instead one that is come to pragmatically in terms of getting to power. So it just doesn't give me the faith that they're going to act in the way that they're saying they're going to act. And ultimately, whether it's conservatives, liberals, NDP, I'm not so confident that any leader will make the changes that really will make a difference. And I think it's because they're all unable to or unwilling to actually address what I believe are the core problems, or is the core problem. Because there's a lot of talk about the economy right now. There's a lot of talk. The liberals are saying, well, we know we're not going to win if we make this an election about climate. We know we're not going to win if we make this an election about social policy. We're just simply not going to win in that situation. But if we can focus our message well enough on the economy, the thing that is actually affecting people most heavily right now, cost of living, housing, young people not feeling like they're able to get a leg up and build a future for themselves, where they can have a family or have whatever life they want to have, whatever, even modest life. It feels out of reach for a lot of people. If we focus on that, then we're going to have a chance to be a lot more successful. And that's why I think that Carney is the perfect candidate for them, because he can talk economics to a certain level. But there's part of his background also that makes it challenging for me personally, given what I believe about why we're actually facing these challenges versus what they believe. It's going to make a lot more sense when I show you this. This is a tweet from actually not so long ago, only a number of hours ago. Let me read it first, and then we'll dive into a bunch of stuff. This is from Carney. Again, we're looking so closely at Carney right now because I'm kind of assuming that this guy is going to be the prime minister, at least for a period of time here. After Trudeau steps down and he wins the leadership race, I'm expecting that to be the outcome. Maybe I'll be entirely wrong. Here's the tweet. We can't change the fact that there will always be shocks, like financial crises, geopolitical events, or climate catastrophes. But we need to understand what we can and must change. We need to understand what we must change. Like how much of your hard-earned money you get to keep and how effective your government is. We can change that. We can change how we build as a country, how we harmonize our economy and expand trade with new partners, and how we keep Canadians secure. I want you to know that I couldn't be more serious about strengthening our economy and protecting Canadians. Now, he says a lot of stuff in this one tweet, and a lot of it sounds good, right? I want to build a strong Canada. Canadians should be secure. You should have more hard-earned money. Well, I guess he doesn't really say that. Let's start with that. This part of the tweet, he says we need to understand what we can change we can change how much of your hard-earned money you get to keep and how effective your government is. Sounds great to me. Sounds like a shifting right in terms of economic policy. Is this a true shifting right of, hey, maybe we need smaller government here? Maybe we need less redistribution of tax money? Or maybe this is an idea where it seems like he's saying we need middle class tax cuts. The same slogan that was used by Trudeau when he was running for his first term, saying, "Hey, we need middle class tax cuts. We're losing our middle class." You can say it. Will it happen? Who knows? I digress. My main issue with this kind of talk from the Liberals is that, especially given Mark Carney's background as a central banker, it seems that everybody, and conservatives also, I feel like everybody's missing the point. Everybody's missing the point of what has actually caused the economy to get to the place where it has. Or at the very least, what is the largest driver of what has happened over the past decade? I don't think it's the minute economic policy. I don't think it's the carbon tax making everything worse, like a lot of people will just say over and over and over again. I'm not on board that that's the biggest problem. I think that they have an inability to point out this big problem, and it's a monetary policy problem. Maybe I'm too like horse with blinders on, just focused right on the lane of things that I like to talk about. But if you can't talk about how monetary policy has impacted Canadians and the pros and cons of the decisions that were made in terms of that monetary policy being the policy directed by central banks, unelected central banks, and the power that they have to impact the economy and your day-to-day life, if you don't point to that, then you lose the effectiveness of your other policies. Let me get into this, because I think for most people who have been following the channel for a while, you've probably heard this spiel quite a lot. I don't think it was the carbon tax or even necessarily the exploitation of temporary foreign workers and international students that really caused most economic hardship for Canadians. I think it was a reality of the decisions made by the central bank in response to an emergency. If let's focus on the time since the pandemic. The increased costs of living that every single person has experienced, I think a lot of people are attributing that to the carbon tax when it shouldn't be. I think that that was a part of it. It was a part of the situation, driving prices up slightly. But when you consider the rebate that you got, it was even more slightly than I'm talking about. Hey, maybe if you're somebody who's very acts the tax, at least hear me out here. At least hear me out. I think the main issue was a devaluing of the Canadian dollar, the printing of money that happened from the central bank throughout the pandemic, the propping up of the economy when the economy wasn't functioning because of the closures due to the pandemic. I think that this really impacted average Canadians the most, while positively benefiting wealthy and corporate elite. You've heard this spiel before if you've been on the channel for a while. By printing all of this money to buy Government of Canada bonds, it drove interest rates down, drove up the price of housing incredibly, in terms of purchase price for housing, but also rental prices, as we have a very low supply of housing in Canada. All of these low interest rate policies and the flooding of the system with money caused goods to go up in cost, because every individual dollar was now worth less, right? This is what I believe really drove the inflation of 2022 that we saw go all the way up to 8%, something that I think people are still coming to terms with the effect of it now, not only economically, but culturally. To a generation of people my age, slightly older, slightly younger, even if a lot of people don't think of it in terms of monetary policy, it really is that monetary policy that has screwed us. House prices were already high, but not like this. Not like this back in 2018, not like this back in 2017. You can make the argument that this monetary policy was necessary and was needed to prop up the economy, and that things would have been worse if we didn't do it. Sure, I'll listen to that argument all day long. But what frustrates me is when politicians talk about the reasons that people are struggling in this economy, and they fail to point this out. When Mark Carney in his tweet says, we can't change the fact that there will always be shocks like financial crisis in this tweet I just showed you. That gets so close to talking about the problem, but we know that he never will. As a former central banker, the head of the Bank of Canada, the head of the Bank of England as well, I don't think that he feels like he's able to say, well, actually, it was a complicated situation. We thought we needed to close down the economy and that COVID was extremely dangerous, so we closed down the economy. But we knew that would crash the economy. So we don't really have that many tools as central bankers. We can lower rates, and we did that. We lowered it to pretty much zero, to 0.25, I think it was, for the Bank of Canada. We lowered it to 0.25, but we had to do more. The economy was going to struggle, it was going to crash, and we were worried that people weren't going to have jobs to go back to when we opened up the economy. So we printed a bunch of money, and we propped up the economy, and there were side effects to that. And some of those side effects were a rising cost of living, rising cost of housing. We own up to that. You're never going to hear that from a central banker, though. You're never going to hear that from a politician, though, or at least I haven't yet. I haven't yet at length. We hear Poilievre talk about it a little bit in these terms, a lot less frequently these days. We heard it a little bit more at the height of 2022. But I think that inability to point to what actually is the root cause of these economic issues has undermined a lot of the Liberal policy over the past 4 years. If every single Canadian has seen the cost of living go up, has seen gas prices go up, has seen their groceries go up, and then you have somebody here saying, well, actually, that's all because of the Liberals' carbon tax policy. Well, it's pretty easy to believe because you've seen the results of it in your day-to-day life. And the Liberals aren't saying that there was any other reason that inflation went up. Maybe they'll say it was the war in Ukraine. It's all Russia's fault. This seems to be this scapegoatism, right? Saying it's all supply chain issues. We still haven't fully healed. This is what the central banks say too. That's why we had inflation. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. We had nothing to do with that inflation. Our printing of hundreds of billions of dollars actually didn't do anything at all. Don't forget about it. It undermines the credibility of those politicians to say, hey, no, actually, think of this what you will, but I think that a Liberal coming out and saying, our carbon tax policy actually isn't that bad economically, because I'll tell you what actually is bad economically, and then go on to explain these nuanced decisions that you have to make as a central banker, and the decisions that were made as a government and a central bank in those moments, and explaining the nuance of those situations and saying, we did something and we thought, and maybe you still think that the cost was worth the benefit of maybe a bunch of businesses not going under. But you don't hear that. You don't hear this cost benefit analysis or even anyone saying, we think the cost was worth it. Maybe you don't. That's fair. But here's our other policy, and it's actually not what is causing all of this economic hardship. There's something else to point to. I would love to hear that. That would make me trust a politician a lot more if they would talk like that, but you simply don't hear it. You simply don't hear it, and it undermines other policy. And I'm not hearing it from Poilievre these days either, so that's another curious thing. But I want to show you a clip now from Poilievre because he kind of gets close to some of the themes that I think are a big issue about unelected power in the world, unelected power in Canada, and how the decisions of those unelected people largely impact me and you. He touches on it, but I don't hear solutions. Listen to this, and then we'll talk about it.
The radical Trudeau-Carney experiment with open borders and post-national globalism has not only divided and weakened our country's sense of identity, it has endangered our people. When I'm Prime Minister, that radical, borderless, globalist ideology pushed by the Trudeau-Carney Liberals will end, and we will have a prime minister that seals the border, protects our people, and puts Canada first.
Okay, so like him or hate him, you can hear the slogans. There's good, catchy things in there that catch your eye because he's saying the right words. He talks about it. He's saying the right words, but he does not note the nuance of the situation or provide many solutions. He's saying the right words to make you kind of think that he cares about it. Maybe he does. I still need to see more. He says globalist, radical, post-national, without pragmatically laying it out. Laying it out that, hey, there's a world order. There are people in positions of power. There's organizations in places of power. The most powerful organizations are the ones that are supranational, the ones that sit on top of all of these nations, things that drive consensus amongst the nations, things that make us say we have a commitment to our global allies or a commitment to our international allies to do such and such a thing. Well, these commitments, these ideas are all formed by small groups of people in those organizations, and maybe those are just ideas. Maybe those are good ideas, but they're the ideas that are shaping the direction that the world is going in. I think that's an issue because when you have individual countries that aren't able to make the best decisions for those individual nations, well, then you have to wonder what was the point of the global organizations. Was it actually about the welfare of all of the member nations in them? Or was it a way to sort of exercise some sort of power or control over those nations? That's what I start to question. But when it comes to all of this stuff, there's no easy solution when we get back to the central banking issue here. What is the solution, right? What do you do? I don't know. Do you like just like a homeless guy in the Palisades? Do you just set it all on fire? Do you just burn it all down to the ground? Because that's a solution that I hear people saying, but then what replaces it? Other people and other organizations of power who exert that control over different nations? Does it become very extremely isolationist? Individual countries only working with themselves? I don't think that's fully the solution. I'm curious what you think about it. Let me know. Do you say abolish all central banks and abolish the corporate or the global corporations, the corrupt global corporations that are run by the world's elite, who benefit from a lot of the central bank policy? Right? When you print money, asset prices go up, stock prices go up, CEO bonuses go up, but the cost of living goes up, and the people who know what the prices of groceries are the ones who struggle from it. These people who are got their personal assistants to go grab that stuff for them, they're not going to be impacted by consumer price inflation changes, but they are going to be impacted by their real estate portfolio and their equities portfolios going up. But do you just abolish all of that? How do you do that? What takes its place? Maybe we've got this system and it's not actually practical to tear it all down. I could understand that argument. Well, what then? To me, one of the biggest problems is, okay, we've got a bunch of people who work for cash, have that cash, use it to live their lives, maybe save a little bit of that cash in a savings account, but are never able to get ahead in terms of owning assets. And I think that that's really the only way that you can play the game here in this current world order is to own assets so that when inevitably there's another crisis and when inevitably there's some fuckery going on with the monetary policy, that at least you own assets that are not beholden to a dollar rate, are not controlled by central banks, but instead are measured in the units that central banks govern. All this to say, asset prices tend to go up, even if the thing that asset isn't more valuable. When it's denominated in dollars, it goes up in value relative to that dollar, more dollars, even if those dollars are worth less. You get what I'm saying here. That's one of the biggest problems, is that there's a whole class of people who don't own any of these assets. And as a result, you have corporations that are largely exploiting workers, right? They're seeing big benefit because they own the company. They own the assets for which all the workers are working. And this sounds like I'm going down a socialist rabbit hole, about to say the government should just own all the companies and then get all the wealth and then redistribute all the wealth to every individual. Everybody's equal. We can make it so that everything works well. Trust us, government central planners. We can make this work. That's not what I'm advocating for. That's what a lot of people will advocate for. I don't trust government not to do that without corruption and without money going to their buddies. But perhaps this idea, maybe this is a step in the right direction. Maybe there needs to be some sort of ownership of the companies granted to employees as they work there. If you've ever worked for a startup, and I've had this experience as a software developer. When you work for a startup, you negotiate your pay, yes, but what is almost more important is negotiating your equity. If I come work for this company, how much of that company am I then going to own? Now, this is easy for startups because oftentimes there's a lot of ownership in the company from the founder and they can willy-nilly dole it out. Of course, they will think twice about doing that too aggressively if they want to personally get wealthy. So I'm not saying in the same extremes as a startup, but what would happen if, say, you worked at the call center for Bell or Rogers, and along with your pay, as the company, as the shares of the company have dividends and they can sort of send money out to all their shareholders, maybe there should be a little bit of dilution of those shares, i.e., instead of almost like a central bank, instead of printing more money, print more shares. Sure, that dilutes the shareholders that exist. Maybe they wouldn't be too happy with that. But at least you're putting ownership into, and give those new shares to the people actually working for the corporation. Because I think that will make people a lot more committed to their jobs and to their work, if they feel like, hey, I own a portion of this company, and to whatever extent I do my best here, and in some small way at the very least, my portfolio of these shares of this company that I work for will go up in value. It gives you a feeling of ownership, and at the very least, assets that may or may not go up in value as central banks do what they do. Maybe that's a half measure. I'm trying to come up with solutions here because I accuse myself a lot in my own head of being a black pill doomer, like everything's messed up, everything's not going to work. What are we going to do with this situation in this world? Doesn't seem like there's a lot of good solutions. So I'm doing my best here, and I hope that you let me know what I've missed here and what other solutions there are here. But I'm glad you took the chance to listen into the show today, and I'm glad we were able to chat a little bit. It's very Team Canada of you to join me on this show. And if you've clicked out already at this point, that's very anti-Canadian. No. I'm the one who decides. I'm the one who decides what's Team Canada. The real Team Canada is going to be at Four Nations Cup in a week here. Real Connor McDavid and Mark Stone and Sidney Crosby and those guys. That's very Team Canada. They would never go meet Trump in Mar-a-Lago. Oh, man. I'm getting off the rails here a little bit. This has been the Russ Matthews Show. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. It doesn't cost you a dime. It's only a click. I appreciate the support. It helps me out dramatically when you do so. It doesn't sign you up for anything. You're not going to get me in your email inbox. I appreciate it. And if you'd prefer to listen to this without any of the YouTube ads, it is now up on Spotify. Look up the Russ Matthews Show. You can listen to it there as well, albeit on a little bit of a delay from YouTube. And it will be coming to other major podcast platforms in the not too distant future. But with all that said, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time. Peace.